that she used to wear, was of a simplicity almost severe. Nevertheless, when she saw Mary, who sought evasion, Katy came frankly forward with outstretched hand. She recognized with regret the change in her former acquaintance, but, knowing, as she must have known, its cause, she decided to ask no questions concerning it, and, if she offered no assistance, she at least proffered no advice. "I just come to see the last o' Miss Marian," she explained. "Near the half of old Rivington Street's been tucked in here among th swells to give the good word to her Jews and Irish, and if the rabbis won't mind for the she niece to come to such a heathen church, I thought Father Kelly might manage to forgive me." Mary's brain was just then too dull to make any but a commonplace answer. "You're lookin' well," she said. "I ought to be, though there's a youngster expected. I tell Herman we was married a few weeks after last election. I don't know how we'll keep a family, but he just whistles and says we'll make out some way, and I guess we will." "I'm glad," said Mary, "that you're married." "Well, so am I most of the time. Of course, the man has some queer ideas, but I'm doin' me best, with Father Kelly's help, to get 'em out of the head of him, and nowadays, when he goes to one of them socialist meetin's by night, I make him make up by goin' with me to early mass next mornin'." She paused and surveyed again the pale woman before her. Essentially Katy had not changed. She had still, and would always have, the big, kind heart and the ready hand of her earlier days. But her condition had altered, and Mary's had evidently again fallen. She looked through an alien atmosphere, and her gaze was distant. The responsibilities and adjustment of young married life shackled her, and must continue to shackle her until they were no longer new. She did not know how to suggest any assistance, did not even believe that it was desired, but, though she still felt that she must refrain from intimate inquiry, one effort she tried to make. "And you," she asked, "how are you gettin' on, Mary?" Mary bit her lip. "Fine," she answered, huskily. "Are you?" "There ain't." Katy floundered in a maze that she would, a few months previously or a few months in the future, have cut her way through with a strong directness. "There ain't nothin' I could." Mary's head shook, almost mechanically. It was not entirely that she felt unable to accept assistance from her former protector, it was rather that she felt only that she must run away. "Oh, no," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm doing grand." The gala crowd was sweeping about them. It jostled both girls and threatened momentarily to separate them. After all, there was nothing more to be said. I got to go," murmured Mary. "I got an appointment, but you'll come to see us sometime, won't you, Mary?" asked Katy, and she gave her address. "We'll have a fine party at the christening and I'll want you to see the baby." "Oh, yes," said Mary, "yes, of course." But Katy was hesitant. "You're sure I can't do nothin'?" she asked. "No, no." Mary caught and pressed with what warmth there was left in her fingers, the Irish girl's hand. "Goodbye," she concluded, and then, in order to keep up the farce of an appointment, she got upon a passing car. Even if panic had not possessed her, she could not have accepted anything that Katy might offer. The most that could have been given her would have been but temporary, and what she must have was a means of earning a living. She rode well downtown, and then walked farther southward. She slipped along the broad, yellow-lighted Bowery, gathering 1 or 2 quarters on her way, and wandered into the narrow, serpentine, fevered alleys of Chinatown. When an ugly rain began to fall, the open door of a mission attracted her, and she went in to rest. It was the typical mission room, very different from the uptown church where she had seen the wedding. This new place was mean, it had a low ceiling and was none too clean. The lights were flaring and the dull walls were enlivened by boldly lettered Bible texts. The air was close. On the platform, at the front of the place, a well-fed man was pleading, in sweat and tears, the cause of his religion. Nearby, his double was making ready the reed organ. Crowded into the unsteady benches were pimpled boys with lolling mouths and preternaturally knowing eyes, youths already old in disease and drink and crime, full-grown men, frog-eyed or blear-eyed, who needed only the faculty of firmness and the chance to cultivate it, old men, who had lost their hold upon work in a country still too barbarous to pension its aged, and, though there were no young girls, here and there Mary saw a few women, bedraggled, sodden, hideous, because men had at some time thought them chic, dainty, beautiful. One of the workers attached to the place, a bland, prosperous man, with a pleasant smile approached Mary and shook her hand as if he were an old acquaintance. He had fat red cheeks, firm teeth, and kindly eyes. "I'm glad to see you, sister," he said. "Are you saved?" Mary's childhood had heard some of the phraseology of evangelicalism. She understood, but she had come to receive worldly, not spiritual, warmth. "No," she said, "I ain't." The worker, however, was accustomed to that reply. He patted her shoulder. "Don't you believe on the Lord Jesus Christ?" he asked. "Well," said Mary, "I never thought much about him." She looked at the floor. She was cold and hungry and afraid. "Then," responded the man, with genuine earnestness, "you ought to begin to think. No man knoweth the hour of his comin'. He is ready with the free gift. Don't you want to come to him?" Mary's life had been one in which there had been small time for the cultivation of religious emotion, and no time at all for the cultivation of religious thought. At her home she had learned as much by rote as she had had to learn, but what she got she held only as so many tasks performed. The words were lessons to be mastered. If they had any relation to facts, those facts were things not to be faced until an age of discretion, and, pending the arrival of that age, the lessons had been stored away with a bland, childish practicality. What followed later had driven out all that preceded it. The shock of her capture, the wild, new order of existence, the endeavor to escape, the battle of service among new conditions, and, at last, the dulling of all the finer sensibilities and the final fight for a mere chance to continue alive, these were circumstances neither propitious to theology nor favorable to faith. She glanced at the mission worker, and then glanced away. "I dunno," she said. "I guess I ain't the kind of woman religion can do much for." "Don't say that," protested the man. His eyes shone with zeal and his voice was tender. "His grace is free for all who come. His mercy is from everlastin' to everlastin'. I been a sinner myself." The speaker's voice swelled with a real pride, "a terrible sinner, and I know what I say, praise the Lord. The meaner and viler we are, the more Jesus needs us. Just open your heart. Just accept him, and you'll never know no more trouble in this world nor the next." "Would I get a job?" asked Mary. The man shook his head, sadly. "That ain't no way to think about salvation," he declared. "What's freely given ought to be freely received. Now is the appointed time. But I gotta make a livin'. I know it, I know it. We've all got to do that, but ain't it better to make one and be saved than to make one and be sent to hell fire?" She assented. "Only," she added, "I don't want to starve, even if I am saved." It was his old difficulty. "I know," he repeated, "and we'd only be too glad to get you work if we could, but times are hard and we've got a waitin' list of 50 at this very minute. Here's some meal tickets, sister, for we want to do what we can, and we know it's hard to save souls on empty stomachs. You just think it over and see if I'm not right about religion." She took the tickets and used them at a 5-cent eating house during the next day. That night she managed to secure a bed in a room over a saloon, a narrow, stuffy room that she shared with 3 other women of her own sort, but the next night she earned nothing, and she had been compelled to pawn her coat for food. She sought a bench in Union Square, where 2 tattered men made room for her. They gave her, to wrap about her chest, newspapers that they had gathered from the gutter, and she dozed until the sharp command of a policeman scattered her comrades, when they made their way to the rear of the Flatiron Building and stood, for warmth, over a grill that sent up occasional blasts of heat from the basement. The rapidity with which one may descend from bad to worse is to be believed only by those who have been penniless and friendless in the larger cities. During the nights that followed, when Mary's clothes grew speedily ragged, dirty, and odorous, and when she earned just enough money to postpone starvation, she became a familiar of Chinatown, learned something of its blind paths and the tangled passages of its fetid tenements. The almond-eyed Orientals tolerantly received her. She came to know the heavy odors of the opium, to chat with clay-white American girls, morphine-eaters, and cocaine and chloral victims, whose Chinese lovers were kind to them, and who never wanted to breathe the open air. She was born with, but the market was oversupplied there, and she found no regular keeper. She came to envy the drug-enslaved women who had first sought the Mott Street district as missionaries, even the little Mongolian girls over whose slavery, so much lighter than her own, the city, from time to time, grew ludicrously excited. Her illness progressed, but, thanks to her hardy birth and the exercise of what care was at all possible, it progressed with a step so tardy as to give no indication of reaching its tragic end, other things being equal, for 2 years or more. She did not again go to see the doctor, she did not have to. The only things that he could have advised were the things that she was in no position to do. Beyond a certain limited amount of routine care, she was helpless. One night, wet and exhausted, she met a sailor in Chatham Square, and drank long with him. "Where you goin' to sleep tonight?" he asked, as they were about to part. He was a short, black-browed man, who walked with a bow-legged roll. The short sleeves of his jacket displayed sinewy, bronze wrists with anchors tattooed upon them. His neck rose out of his low-cut mariner's shirt like the neck of a brown, fighting bull, and his black eyes, set deep under bushy, frowning brows, were red, like those of a bull that is dangerous. He had been taken with a drunken passion for her, and though, when he kissed her, his upper lip scraped her face like a file, though his incessant grip of her hands hurt her, and though his heavy foot, seeking hers beneath the saloon table, nearly crushed her own, she had to answer him with the professional smile. "I dunno where I'll sleep," she said. "I guess Lee Hunk's Letty'll put me up." The sailor chucked her pointed chin so roughly that she thought her neck would crack. "Why don't you come along o' me?" he inquired. "Where's that?" "To one o' our places. I know a beauty, and I'll take good care o' you, and afterward you can stay on." "One of your places? What's those?" "Places we visit. Places for seafarin' men. I tells you I knows a daisy big lou's keepin' it and they needs a new gal there, for I stopped in as I come ashore this evenin' and they told me the one I knew after last voyage was buried only yesterday." Mary shuddered. "Is it all right?" she asked. "All right? Course it's all right. But mind you," his black eyes leaped into a sudden threat, "I'm talking you tonight. No philandrin'. For this night yer my gal." She looked away. "Mind you that," he drunkenly repeated. "I'm mostly as gentle as Nathan's lamb, but when I'm tricked I'm ready with my hands." It's all right. It's a good place for a good time. Plenty to drink and the best o' company. Better come. I can fix it so's you can get a steady job there. She shivered again, but she could not see why she should shiver. After all, she was glad to learn of any place where she would be sure of food to eat and a roof to cover her, and so she came to Somerton's. XXIX The doors of the shadow. It is a winding and tortuous way across Greenwich Village to Somerton's. The mazed course runs through streets that squirm like worms between a fisherman's fingers. It skirts cobbled courts that are in twilight at midday and damp in the longest drought. It turns and doubles up passages that seem blind, dodges through the very bones of tumble-down warehouses, storehouses, houses so ramshackle that the imagination can conjure no possible use for them, and it comes out at last into a foul thoroughfare that appears to be no better than a stinking alley, so close to the water's edge that the masts of the river's cluttered craft look as if they grew upon the dirty, sagging roofs opposite, and so near to the wharves that the green walls of the buildings are wet and odorous as if from a continuous application of bilge water. By day, when its residents are asleep, this street is loud with straining Norman horses, and clattering vans, and whip-cracking carters from the docks, but by night, and the nights are very dark down there, it becomes the haunt of sailors and longshoremen, drunk and shouting, or still and drugged. Then the blue electric lamps snap hysterically at distant corners, the uneven pavement mounts steeply upward, or dashes precipitately downward, with no warning. Laughter and curses and the crash of breaking glass or spluttering oaths issue now and again from the blackness at one's elbow, where, hidden among the warehouses, stand the houses for the storing of another sort of wares, the slave houses maintained for mariners. Grotesque men, could you see them, stagger into dim entrances, terrible caricatures of women, if the light would show them, steal out and dart upon gutter-couched drunkards to paw their pockets. The night is alive with shadows, and the whole street a hungry, quivering quicksand. Only by urging her eyes to their utmost could Mary make out anything of the house before which she and her unsteady companion came to pause. Even then, all of which she could be sure was that, cowering under the shadow of some huge brick building, and skulking beneath its own rotting eaves, it was a half-sunken, old, narrow house, long since abandoned as unfit for legitimate purposes, and leaning rakishly to one side, like an ancient libertine that knows his evil and grins at it. The sailor knocked lightly at an almost unseen door. A panel of it slid open and threw a ray of light on his face. "Who's there?" asked a voice that was like the rasping of a file. "It's Billy," said the sailor. "Billy who?" "Billy Stevens." "Let me in, Lou." A pair of swollen eyes came to the open panel and looked, down the shaft of light, into the sinister face of Bill. "Who's that with you?" croaked the voice. "A gal I got for you." "Is she all right?" "O' course she is, Lou, else what in hell'd she be doin' with me?" "Come on, let me in." The swollen eyes disappeared, and the panel was shut. There was a sound of the withdrawal of several bolts. Then the door swung open, was closed and relocked behind the newcomers, and Mary found herself in an unfurnished hall, not more than 15 feet square, lighted by a dim lamp standing on the lowest step of a steep flight of stairs, and guarded by the owner of the swollen eyes. At least in height, Big Lou was gigantic. She was fully 6 feet tall. She stooped a little and was extremely thin, with a hollow chest and narrow flanks, partially hidden by an old red cotton dressing gown, but the long arms were like flails, and Lou had a temper that did not hesitate to use them as such. Her dirty brown hair was already touched with gray, she had almost no chin, her nose was a smudge in her sodden face, and her cheeks were heavy with years of drunkenness. Her mouth hung loose and quarrelsome, and, as she bent over to look hard at Mary, her breath was foul. She addressed herself, however, entirely to the black-browed Stevens. "Where'd you get her?" she asked, as if Mary were one of the animals not gifted with articulate speech. Stevens told of their meeting. "Where's she from?" The sailor gave a rapid and wholly fictitious biography. "How old?" "20, said Bill. "I ain't," protested Mary. But the sailor shot her an ugly look. "Close your trap," he told her, and then, to Big Lou, he repeated, 20. Big Lou picked up the lamp and, holding it in one blackened claw, passed the other over Mary, with dexterous appraisement, from shoulders to knees. "I'll give you a 5 spot for her," she croaked. "You'll go to the devil," retorted Bill. 6. 10. "You're a damned thief, Stevens, that's what you are," growled the old woman. "I'll give you 7, and not another goddamned cent." Mary leaned against the moist wall. She was now past caring, and she hardly heard. "Make it 7.75, said Bill, with sudden ingratiation. Big Lou raised the lamp again and again regarded the animal, her swollen eyes sharpening. "I'll tell you what I'll do," she said, once more facing the sailor. "Are you goin' to stop here tonight?" "Yes." "Well, I'll come up in the mornin' and take a closer look. If she passes that, I'll give you 7.50. Bill's brown face worked in thought, but the thirst for liquor was upon him, and he compromised. "All right," he said, "if you'll give me 5 down on account." The giantess flung aside her red dressing gown and, from a black cotton stocking that hung loose upon a shriveled shank, drew a few greasy bills. From these she reluctantly counted 5, handed them to Stevens, and returned the rest to their original place of safety. "Gee on up," she said. "I stay here till work's done, and take tolls." From somewhere in the shadows she produced a black flask and, as Mary, with the sailor's tattooed hand tightly under her arm, began the steep ascent, Big Lou settled herself at her post of gatekeeper upon the lowest step. Those stairs seemed almost perpendicular. They rose out of the darkness of the hallway at an alarming angle, each step was close upon a foot high, they were not a yard wide, their upper half was boxed between 2 walls, and they opened directly into the room that evidently served as the parlor of Big Lou Somerton's establishment. The room was small and badly lighted by a kerosene hand lamp, which stood upon a circular center table and sent up a thin column of smoke to the sooty ceiling. A spotted lounge with dilapidated springs stood in one corner, the faded paper was peeling from the plaster, and a broken stove, which glowed an angry red, heated the place to a degree that was well nigh unbearable. The air was stale and rancid, both from the company that was present and from a long entertainment of similar companies, in days gone by. There were only 2 persons in the room. Both were seated at the table, both were drinking whiskey poured into ragged-edged glasses from a bottle that stood between them, and both were, or had been, women. Of these one coughed so sharply and constantly between her toothless gums, and was so shrunken under her blue calico Mother Hubbard, that it was plain she would soon be nothing, while the other was a creature with face red and bloated, features stunted and coarse, eyes that glowed dully, and the voice of a crow. Stevens presented Mary to them, and wasted no formalities. "This here's a new one," he said, and, motioning his charge to a 3rd chair, himself pulled up a 4th. The 2 inmates received her with a loud duet that was almost a choral jeer. 2 more glasses were produced from a shadowy cupboard, and the drinking recommenced. Mary took one long drink and, wasted by privation, passed at once for some time into a daze in which, though she saw all, she reckoned little. She heard Stevens drop into the babbling stage of drunkenness. She noted that, though the women kept pace with his potations, they poured water into their own whiskey and gin into the sailors. She saw him loll in his chair and sway over the table, she felt his heavy head drop at last on her thin shoulder, and she did not move while, as he lay there, his companions now hers went through his clothes and tiptoed out of a rear door. It was then that, with a quick start, she regained control of herself at the sound of speech below and the tread of feet on the stairs. A rough voice had assured Big Lou that it was all right, and another voice was supplementing, "Rest easy, my dear lady, we are paying as we go. Michael, here, is, as you know, a deckhand on the admirable yacht of my admirable friend Marsden Payne, with whom I have been on a winter excursion, and he has kindly consented to show me his own section of little old New York." Mary knew that voice, although she could not at once identify it, but, though she sprang up so quickly that she wakened the tumbling Stevens, who slipped to the floor, she could not escape before she found herself directly regarding the flushed face, glowing gray eyes, and disordered hair of Philip Beekman. Still young and slim in his yachting clothes, he looked at her, swaying a little in the doorway, his back to those perilous stairs, and with no clear recognition. "Hello," he said. "I think I've had the pleasure of meeting you somewhere before." Mary's mouth tightened. She had herself now well in hand. She shook her russet head. "I guess not," she said. But her voice betrayed her. "Good Lord," said Beekman. The flush deepened on his face. With one hand he snatched his yachting cap from his black hair, the other he suddenly held out to her, trembling. "Good Lord," he repeated, this time with something that was nearly awe in his tone. "Aye, it's Violet. Will you? Won't you please shake hands?" Scarcely less amazed by his manner than was he by her appearance, she took his hand. Beekman turned to someone on the stairs behind him. "Get out, Mike," he said. "I've found a friend." There was a plucking at his sleeve and the murmur of a concerned voice from the rear. "No," said Philip, "get out. I tell you that I have found a friend. Go down to the tall lady and hand her your money and then make tracks for the yacht. You may tell Mr. Payne that I shall return in an hour." Again a muffled protest from the dangerous stairway. "Pardon me a moment," said Beekman, and turned full around. "Now, then," he continued to his guide, "you get out. I am perfectly well able to take care of myself, and I want a private talk. Do you expect me to kick you downstairs? No. I should probably break your back if I did then. Good night." He stood there while the deckhand's heavy feet clattered downward, waited until he had heard Big Lou grumblingly give Mike the means of exit, and then he turned again to Mary. "What," he rapidly began, and his handsome face grew once more earnest, "what in the name of heaven are you doing in this den? No," he continued, raising a quick hand, "don't tell me. I remember how I sent you out of my mother's house and, upon my word, I'm afraid to hear. I couldn't do anything else, but I don't know. Anyhow, there's one thing sure, you need money. Well, I made a little in the game tonight, not much for Payne, but a good slice for me, and it's yours, the Lord knows it ought to go to you." She had tried to stop him until he spoke of money, but when he mentioned that, she let him run on, let him search his pockets, and at last let him thrust something into her open hand. "Here," he said, take it as a favor to me, take it, and remember what I said to you in Roses. Watch your chance, get out of here, and for God's sake go back to your own home." Her fingers closed upon the bills and transferred them to her stocking, and as she did this a movement on the floor made them both turn. Bill Stevens, whom Mary had forgotten and whom Beekman had not seen, gathered himself together, and at last stood more or less upright upon his unsteady bowed legs. His heavy body rocked uneasily, but his dark face, with its bushy brows and sinister eyes, was thrust forward glowering. One sinewy tattooed hand gripped the back of a chair, the other, knotted into a hard fist, he raised slowly toward Beekman. "It's your turn to go," he said, with a lingering oath. "This here's my gal, she belongs to me and so does any money she gets." Instantly Philip was his old, assured self. That quality which was most characteristic of him, that curious mixture of much that was bitter and a little that was sweet, lighted his eyes and rang in his voice. "Where do you come from?" he asked, smiling. "You look as if you got out of a trapdoor, like the fairy in the play." "None o' your business where I come from," said Bill. "The point is where I'll send you, if you ain't careful." Mary, who did not like the looks of things, tried to interpose. She put the palms of her hands against the sailor's rough cheeks. "Listen, Bill," she said, "this is an old friend of mine likely," grunted Bill. "He is, though, ain't you?" Mary appealed, with a sidelong glance at Beekman. "Certainly I am," said Philip. Stevens lowered his fist, but his red eyes remained full of hate. "I don't care who you are," he rumbled, "this here's my woman." "All right," said Beekman, "that's to your credit, I'm sure. A man is known by the woman he keeps, and you can't have a better. Only, you see, my friend, I ain't your friend." Once more Mary interposed. "Just sit down, Bill," she urged. "Sit down and have a drink with us. You can hear all we got to say." Stevens sank into a chair, but when Beekman, with Mary between them, pushed the bottle toward Bill, the sailor would have none of it. "I'll stop a bit," he said, "but I ain't goin' to drink with you, and you needn't think it." Philip was still undisturbed. "Have it your own way," he said. "I know how it is, when a man falls in love, he swears off liquor, when he falls out of love he takes to liquor again. One sort of drunkenness is as much as he can stand at a time. I'll take a drink." Mary, who now began to fear acute trouble, slipped a hand to Stevens, but he drew away. "I think I'll smoke if I may," continued the undisturbed Beekman. "A pipe is domestic, a cigar is philosophic, and a cigarette is a cynic. I shall have a cigarette. William." And he offered his silver case to the sailor. "No," said Stevens, shortly. Beekman tossed his head. Mary saw his gray eyes snap. "William," he said, "you have got to learn that the best girl is never so good as the next. And you have got to learn manners. If you won't behave yourself properly, I think you had better leave." Stevens's fingers opened and closed slowly. "You go to hell," he said. Beekman rose quietly. His cigarette was in one hand, and with the other, instead of threatening, he pointed to the stairway. "Run along," he said. Stevens jumped to his feet and crouched, like a panther ready to spring. Mary, overturning her chair, flung her arms about him and pinioned him in an embrace. "Don't, Bill," she whispered, and, over her shoulder, "Don't, Mr. Beekman. Can't you two be friends? Can't you see it's all right, Bill? Can't you let him alone, Mr. Beekman? Bill, you know how much I think of you." She put her lips to his rough face. She whispered rapid, unthought lies into his ear. She caressed and cajoled him, and at last, when Philip had been persuaded into a half-scornful apology, she managed to get Stevens out of the room and started him down the stairway to seek sympathy of Big Lou while she herself had her talk with Beekman. They sat down again at the round table and took a drink. Philip wanted to upbraid himself for his conduct to her in his mother's house, and yet, because he felt that he could have followed no course save that which he had taken, he did not know how to begin. All that he was sure of was that there was a wrong somewhere, and that he must somehow make confession of it. Mary, on the other hand, was divided between panic from the trouble so lately avoided and a desire to hear from Philip nothing approaching condolence. She sought escape in the commonplace. "You mustn't mind him," she said, with a nod toward the stairs down which the glowering Bill had departed. "Not a bit," answered Beekman. "I only wanted to get rid of him in order to tell you how sorry I am for you know." "Don't talk about that, Mr. Beekman, please." "But I must talk about it." "Not now, not yet. Tell me how you are." "Oh, I'm as near right as I ever am, or ever will be." "But, Violet, you're looking rich." His eyes followed hers to his gilt-buttoned yachting jacket. "You can never judge a man by his clothes," he said. "Necessity is the mother of pretension." "Are you married yet?" "Hardly. There are only two things that a man can't honestly promise, to love, and to cease to love. I'm still too poor to afford those lies." Mary only half understood his mood, but she was wholly intent on keeping him free of dreaded topics. "Do you hear anything of the people we used to know?" she asked. "Well," said Philip, "Rose was let off, you know, and is back at the old address and the old business." He looked at his watch and started. "By Jove," he continued, "I must have been pretty tight. I had no idea it was so late. I've got to be getting back to the yacht soon." He stood up, his cap in one hand. Mary followed him to the stair door, and there he turned. "Violet," he said, "I am going to tell you how sorry I am. I am going to tell you, whether you like to hear it or not." The flush had gone from his face and eyes, leaving them simple and sincere. Mary's voice faltered. She understood some things that she had never before understood. "It didn't matter none," she replied. "You couldn't help it?" "I dare say I couldn't. I don't know. These things are too much for me. But I do know that I am sorry from the bottom of my heart. And if I can ever do anything," he put out his hand, and, as she took it, he raised her hand to his lips. At that instant there was a yell of rage from behind him. Mary, springing back, saw him half turn and reel. She saw a brown, tattooed hand close about his throat, choking his cry of alarm. She saw Bill Stevens's distorted face and red eyes appear above Beekman's shoulder. She saw a knife flash and bury itself deep in the young man's side. And then, with a tremendous smash, both men disappeared down those murderous, black stairs. It seemed to Mary that she lost not a moment in running down to them, yet, when she reached the hall, the little drama was finished. The sailor was lying stunned in a corner, and Big Lou, with the rescued lamp beside her, was kneeling above Philip's body and running her quick claws through his pockets. "Damn your soul, get upstairs," she cried to Mary. But Mary hesitated. Overhead she heard the scurry of skirts and hurried feet. Before her lay the man that had once so harmed her. His coat had been torn open and a great red smear grew larger and larger upon his white silk shirt. His mouth was twisted, but still. His grey eyes stared at the begrimed ceiling. Philip Beekman was dead. She leaped across the body, tore back the bolts, flung open the door, and nearly fell into the pitch-black street. As she ran around the nearest corner, she heard the cry of Mike, the deckhand, who must have been waiting nearby, and then the sharp alarm call of a policeman's nightstick. XXX her father's house. Her way must have led her first to the river and then well northward, she did not know. She did not even know whether she ran or walked. All that she did know was that, at least for hours to come, she must put as many miles as she could between her own tossing thoughts and that still face with the staring eyes which lay at the foot of the steep, dark stairs in Somertons. The clocks, had she looked at them, would have told her that the night was gone, but the winter darkness still enveloped the city when she found herself at last standing before an illuminated ticket window and addressing a sleepy clerk at a ferry. "I want a ticket," she said, and laid down one of the bills that Philip Beekman had given her. "Where to?" yawned the clerk. How did it happen that the name which rose to her lips was the name of her native town, a word that she had not uttered since the morning of her awakening in the house of Rose Leger? Perhaps it was because the dead man had, with almost his last words, pleaded with her to go home. Perhaps it was because that name, of which she had for so long tried never to think, was, in reality, the one always nearest to her heart. Perhaps it was only because no other town was familiar to her. In any event, the name was spoken without consideration of the consequences, and, before she had time to pause or to repent, the clerk had handed her the change, and with it the bit of pasteboard that would bear her home. "There's a boat in 10 minutes, he said, "but you'll have to wait an hour in Jersey City. The first train doesn't go till 6:05. Of what immediately followed she had, thereafter, no clear recollection. She remembered only buying a cold sandwich and a half-pint of whiskey in a deserted cafe, crossing a bitterly cold, sullen stretch of water from a twinkling cannon to a shadowy shore, walking, for warmth, weary though she was, up and down, along a damp, echoing train shed, and then, at last, passing a clanging iron gate, climbing into a coach, and falling, nearly stupefied, into an uncomfortable, red plush-covered seat. She had but the faintest mental picture of changing cars, and none at all of any subsequent incident, until, in a black dawn, there flashed upon her, from between the frost figures on the window, a bit of landscape that warned her she was approaching home. The track came suddenly to the riverside. Beneath a grey sky, which, though the morning was well advanced, the sun seemed afraid to climb, there raced the 1.5-mile wide strip of grey water. It crashed across a ruined dam, it swept above a submerged chute through which, years before, the big pine rafts from the upper Alleghenies used to be hurled on their way to the Chesapeake. There had been a thaw. Only here and there could Mary see the ominous crests of the rocks that threatened the mid-channel. The islands, with trees bare of foliage, were under water, and far away, from the cloudy York County shore, the high hills rose above the mist, dun and cheerless, forbidding and cold. With a quick catch in her throat, she saw the river road that she had so often tramped on holidays, now axle-deep in mud. Over there were the leafless woods where, when the boughs were green, the children used to picnic, and here, nearer the town, where patches of soiled snow hid under the stunted pines, was the path where one time came, for pink laurel branches, a girl that she had been. The engine whistled sharply and stopped. Mary mechanically readjusted the hat that she had not touched since she had put it on for the work of the evening previous, the evening so long ago. She stepped to the platform. The station was just as it had always been. It looked smaller and dirtier, but she knew that it had not changed, and a sharp pain shot through her heart at the realization that, in this town, everything had gone on its placid way while so much had been happening to one of its children. There were the same grinning gamins waiting for the New York newspapers, the same Negro porters from the 2 hotels, the same station master calling the train, just as he used to call it in the days when she had watched the outgoing coaches with envious longings for a sight of the strange lands toward which they were bound. Then, as her aching feet touched the cinder of the thoroughfare, she realized her danger. She had no plan, no scheme of accounting for herself, some unreasoned impulse, partly, doubtless, The primal instinct that drives the wounded beast to its den, had overcome her fears and turned her face in the direction of the home whither she had, for so long, dreaded to return. But now she was seized with the terror of recognition by the townspeople, and so she lowered her head and walked, with the swiftness of panic, among the little knot of loafers about the station door. Now that she was here, what was she to say, what to do, where to turn? She moved, unable to evolve any order from the chaos of her thoughts. She could only go over and over the memory of that last day in school, the early violets, purple and fragrant, peeping through the lush grass on the lawns of 2nd Street, the flaming oriole in the Southwark Yard, the lazy sunlight flowing through the open windows of Miss England's sleepy classroom. Mary's blue eyes were bright then, her mouth was red, her cheeks pink, lithe, strong-limbed and firm of body, her walk had owned the easy, languid grace of a wild animal. And now, the lawns were bare, only a few persistent sparrows hopped in the gutters and along the ground, the sky was empty of sunlight, and she came to a supreme pause. Habit had led her aimless feet. She was standing, in the full morning, before the 2-story brick house that was her father's home. She knew that the door remained unlocked from dawn to night, but she did not at once enter. She was afraid to go in, afraid to stand still, afraid to go away. Then, from the next house, came decision. It was Etta's, her married sister's place, and she heard someone within it rattle at its door. Anything was better than a meeting with Etta. Mary quietly opened the door to her father's house and slipped inside. She went down the brief, darkened hallway, past the drawn curtains of the parlor, through the twilight of the dining room, and stopped at the open entrance to the small, crowded kitchen, where, among neatly arranged and brightly polished pots and pans, her mother was bending over the glowing stove. Mrs. Denby looked up with a start. Still stooped, still hatchet-faced, but grayer and more shrunken, she stood there, her sleeves rolled from her thin forearms, her forehead wet by present labor, her mouth set hard by labors gone. "Get out o' here," she said. "Mom." Mary raised and spread her arms in quick petitioning, and then, in that stranger, Mrs. Denby recognized her child. "You," she cried. She dashed her damp hands to her checkered apron, she stepped toward her daughter with her own arms wide. She bent to kiss her and she drew as suddenly away. "There's liquor on your breath," she gasped. "I know," said Mary, her voice low and trembling. I ain't been well, Mom." The kiss was given, but less abandonedly than it had promised, and, as the mother drew away, her keen eyes searched the girl from face to feet. Over the multitude of maternal questions there rose the three for which Mary was least prepared. "Mary, what is it? Where is he? Didn't he treat you right?" They caught the girl at her weakest point. "Who?" she asked. "Who?" Mrs. Denby's eyes grew stern again. "Who? You needn't say no more than that still. I ought to have knowed when I seen you. Nobody could look at you yet and not know. Why, you're old. Your things are worn out." Her tone increased to loud accusations. "Where did you get them clothes?" Mary's lips faltered. "I bought 'em," she said. "Did anybody see you come in here?" "I don't know, no, nobody did." "Thank God for that." Mrs. Denby pointed a long, gnarled finger at her daughter. She pointed it at the bedraggled hat, still bearing traces of a finery too pronounced for that small town. She pointed to the waist and to the skirt. "It's true, then," she cried. "It's true, then. You been a bad woman." In the doorway Mary swayed. She leaned heavily against the wall. She was too tired to lie. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, her mother echoed, yes, and you own up to it. The whole town said it, your pop said it, they all told me yet, and I stood up for you. I showed 'em your letter, I says you was married, I kept on believin' you'd right, I stuck to it, and now you come here to shame me. You come here when you're worn out, when no one else'll have you. You come here, brazen, not carin' still, a bad woman, and I guess you think I'll take you in. Her poor face writhed. Her dim eyes shot fire. Her withered breasts rose and fell in a spasm of indignation and wounded pride. Mary, still leaning against the kitchen wall, put out her hands as if to ward away a blow. "Don't, Mom," she said. "Please don't. I will. I've a mind to beat you. I'd like to know what possessed you to flaunt yourself in this place. You can't stay here. You can't stay in this house that you've shamed still, and you can't stay in this town. Mom. You can't stay in this town. Do you hear that? If you do, if you try to stay here and mock me, a decent woman, I'll have you arrested, I'll have you sent to the lockup, Mom," interrupted Mary. "I won't hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt nobody. I didn't come here to do no harm. How can you come here yet without doin' harm? Ain't you done enough without comin' back here to shame your own folks?" "But, Mom," Mary pleaded, "I won't shame nobody, I'll do whatever you say." Little Mrs. Denby collapsed upon a kitchen chair. She rocked from side to side. She fanned herself with her checkered apron, grief conquered anger, and long dried tears came at last to her old eyes and coursed, unrestrained, down her hard cheeks. "What did I ever do for to deserve this?" she moaned. "What did I ever do to receive this judgment? A child o' mine. A child o' mine. And her the baby that she was. Didn't her pop and me bring her up the best we could? Ain't I always lived accordin' to the Lord's word? What have I done to deserve this?" Mary stepped to the weeping woman's side. She put her fingers to the gray hair and stroked it, timidly. "Go away," cried the mother. "Don't you dare to touch me. Don't you dare yet to pollute me. Oh, a child o' mine to do this." She fell into another paroxysm of grief, and Mary sank to her knees and took one of the gnarled hands between her own hands. "Listen, Mom," she said, "I'll tell you all about it, and then you'll know." She did tell her, as much as she dared, but Mrs. Denby only half understood. The elder woman's life had been cast in a mold, it had long since hardened into a destined shape, and no sympathy on her own part, no explanations on the part of another, could alter her. Dire necessity she had often known, but she had not known it amid surroundings where the sufferer's only course was that which alone had been possible for Mary. If she softened, it was not because she comprehended, but because Mary was her child. "Don't tell me no more," she said at last. "You could 'a gone to work. I tried that, and nobody'd have me. You could 'a gone to some church folk. I did, but they couldn't get me a job. You could 'a gone to some institution already. How'd I have lived after I come out? Well, you shouldn't 'a run away in the first place. Didn't we treat you right?" To have answered that question in the negative would not have been to be altogether true, and Mary did not even yet see enough clearly to discern that the conditions which had driven her from home were economic forces that made parents and child equally blameless. "Can't I stay here?" she appealed. "Can't I please stay here and work for you?" Mrs. Denby shook her head. "I'd work hard. I'd help you. I wouldn't never complain. All I want is just to be quiet. I'd work hard. Nobody'd never know. It'd be all over town by evenin' still. No, it wouldn't. I'd say I was a widow. I'd say think oh your pop, sobbed Mrs. Denby. Why, he'd kill you, Mary. The mother shivered as she considered the wrath of the giant, whom hard work had hardened past the touch of all the tenderer emotions. He'd just beat you up and throw you into the street for everybody to see. She half rose in a new anxiety. Why, he's on the early shift, and he might come here most any minute. Etta might come in, and Sally'll be back from school soon. But, Mom, Mary blindly persisted. I'd work so hard. I wouldn't never be cross. I'd help you. I'd do all the housework, and you could teach me to cook the way you do. We got to think o' Sally yet, continued Mrs. Denby. Every time she gets mad now she says she'll run away like you done. We got to think o' her. She's a growin' girl, and what'd it be to have you around her? But, Mom, I won't hurt her. Can't I just stay and work, and wash dishes, and such things? I wouldn't mind washin' dishes, Mary smiled wanly, like I once did. And then there's Etta, said the mother, still busied in her own confusion. She's got a baby. Mary's heart leaped. Such a lovely baby girl, can't I? Oh, Mom, can't I just get a peep at it? How could you, and we have to think what it'd be for her if you was here and she growed up. The prodigal choked with tears. Mom, she pleaded. How'd I hurt em? You don't think I'd? The town thinks so, and the town tell em so, too. And anyways, Mary, we're poor, we're dreadful poor. The mill was shut down all summer and fall. It's only just started already, and it's only workin' half-time now. We ain't had money for months still, and now it all goes for old bills. We couldn't do it, even if we wanted to. For half an hour more Mary begged, but she begged in vain, and though the mother ended by another attack of tears, and though the two wept together in each other's arms, they knew that they were together for the last time. Your clothes are so thin, quavered Mrs. Denby, with a pathetic endeavor to sink her grief in practical anxiety. You ain't got no coat, and your feet are near on the ground still. Mrs. Denby had no money, there was literally not a cent in the house, but she unearthed from an old trunk, and pressed, for pawning, upon Mary, a heavy, old-fashioned gold bracelet, which had been a wedding present, and, though the daughter protested that she had money enough to buy some clothes, the mother got her own coat upon the daughter's shoulders. They were still standing in the kitchen, as women awaiting the summons of death, when first one steam whistle and then another began to call across the town. It was noon, and the moment of Puddler Denby's return. Without a word they walked, hand in hand, across the short backyard, for Mary, it was tacitly agreed, must not risk an appearance upon the street in the neighborhood of her father's house. Without a word, Mrs. Denby's knotted fingers opened the latch of the whitewashed gate. Without a word mother and daughter flung themselves into each other's arms again, and then, still in silence, Mary trudged away. She did not look back until she came to the first corner, and, when she got there, she saw her mother's shrunken body still at the gate, the old hand waving, the aproned figure shaking with sobs. It was still there when Mary reached the second corner, but when she turned at the third, it was gone. Her pain was no longer poignant. Grief had reached the mark whence it passes to stupefaction, and Mary pursued her way as if her actions were those suggested to a subject of hypnotic control. In order to avoid the crowd at the station, she walked on up the alley, until the alley ended in an intersecting turnpike along which ran the trolley line to the county town. She waited there, stolidly, for a car, mounted that, descended at the end of the road, and, after another delay, climbed upon a train that would take her without change to Jersey City. For nearly 24 hours she had eaten nothing, but she bought another small flask at the terminus, and, as the ferry boat glided between the creaking slips into the tossing water, she took a deep draught of whiskey. She walked to the stern and looked over the side. It was night. Here gleamed the railway signs under which the boat had just passed, the signs of those roads that, she had now discovered, ended as fatally for her freedom as if they had ended in an insurmountable wall. Ahead towered the other walls, the black walls of that living prison, that vast, malevolent, conscious jail into which she had once gone with such a store of hopes whereof not one had ever been fulfilled, of anticipated pleasures whereof not one had ever been tasted, and to which she must now, to serve out a life sentence, return. Must she return? She looked up and down the dismal river, crowded with trafficking craft, and she remembered that other river at home as she had seen it on the spring afternoon when she had played the truant from school. She remembered the swirling eddies across which the nearer hills had been changing from brown to green. She remembered the descending Donegal Valley, fresh with germinating life, the flowering shrubs, and the sap-wet trees along the shore, the scent of a warm April, and the music of the Susquehanna. These things she remembered, and then she looked again at the nearing city. Must she return? She touched the rail. Over that lay certain escape. The deck was deserted, the movement would be quick. The plunge. She leaned forward, she saw the leaping, greedy, icy waves, and, with a loud sob, staggered back to the bench that ran along the exterior of the upper saloon. She could not do it. With nothing but suffering and horrors to live for, she could not put an end to life. She was afraid of the cold, she was afraid of the struggle, she was afraid of the pang, she was afraid of death. It was a new thing, death. She had been afraid of it ever since that morning of her awakening when the thought of seeking it had first occurred to her. Since her first crossing of this water, her experiences had been a procession of new things, each more terrible than the last. She had come to dread the new, and this novelty of death she dreaded lest it should be the most terrible of all. Life, which had robbed her of everything else, had, at this last, robbed her of the courage to quit it. Youth, hope, purity, strength, beauty, the ability to work, even lust and hate, all these were dead within her, dead beyond possibility of resurrection. If Max had only given her a child. If he, or any one of the others, had only killed her. But they had murdered love, and the only thing that lived in her was the fear of death. Out of the bitterness of her own heart, out of the abysses of her own knowledge of things as they are, she saw much of the truth. A rare good fortune had favored Katie Flanagan, but Mary, her parents, Rose, and her girls, Carrie, Policeman Riley and Magistrate Diker, even Angel and Max, not one of them, well regarded, could be unequivocally condemned. They were all, preying or preyed upon, an inevitable result. They were but the types of millions everywhere. New York itself, with all its women slaves and men slaves, must be but an illustration of what the other cities of the world are and have been. No rescue of a slave could put an end to the slavery. Something was wrong, but what that something was, or how it was ever to be made right, she could not guess. She knew only that, down the years, wherever walked the great god Poverty, that great god led prostitution by the hand. Finally comprehending, if unable to formulate, these things, at 10 o'clock that night Mary Denby, remembering what Philip Beekman had told her, rang the doorbell of a familiar house and faced what she would once have feared more than death. She faced complacent, untroubled, prosperous, and protected Rose Leger. The woman, still the good-natured woman of the brewery calendar, cut short Mary's flow of apologies. "Forget it," she said. "It don't matter what you did. You didn't know any better. Here, just take this $10 and tell me what else I can do for you. And Mary pushed the money away. I don't want that, she said. I want, oh, Miss Rose, won't you please take me back? But Rose, surveying the human ruin before her, shook, very positively, her masses of yellow hair. No, she answered, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. It wouldn't be good business. You see, the life's got you, Violet, you're all in. Editors note the facts presented in the House of Bondage are so startling as to seem incredible. They are, however, well known to those who have become familiar with the problem of the social evil, and can be duplicated indefinitely from court records, the findings of various investigating bodies, such as the Congressional Commission, whose report on this subject is known as Senate Document Number 196, Importing Women for Immoral Purposes, being a partial report from the Immigration Commission on the Importation and Harboring of Women for Immoral Purposes, published December 10, 1909, a book entitled Panders and Their White Slaves, by Clifford G. Rowe, in which the author gives in detail many cases successfully prosecuted by him in Chicago in the last year or two, and from the sworn testimony taken before the special grand jury appointed in New York in January, 1910, to investigate the so-called white slave traffic, the full report of which investigation follows. White slave traffic presentment of the additional grand jury for the January term of the Court of General Sessions in the County of New York, in the matter of the investigation as to the alleged existence in the County of New York of an organized traffic in women for immoral purposes. Filed June 29, 1910 Court of General Sessions in and for the City and County of New York. In the matter of the investigation as to the alleged existence in the County of New York of an organized traffic in women for immoral purposes. To the Honorable Thomas C. O'Sullivan, Judge of the Court of General Sessions. Sir, we, the members of the additional grand jury for the January term, 1910, respectfully present as follows, in the charge delivered to us by Your Honor on the 3rd day of January, 1910, Your Honor said, there have been spread broadcast in the public print statements that the City of New York is a center or clearinghouse for an organized traffic in women for immoral purposes, or what has come to be known as the white slave traffic. Some of these statements may have been published with ulterior motive and may have been mere sensationalism, but some are said to be based upon official investigation and charges made by persons who profess to have knowledge of the fact. This traffic in women, it is charged, follows two main objects. First, the procuring of women of previous chaste character, who through force, duress, or deceit are finally made to live lives of prostitution. Second, the procuring of women who are already prostitutes and placing them with their consent in houses where they may ply their trade. But the main object, gentlemen, which I desire you to keep in mind throughout your investigation is the uncovering not alone of isolated offenses, but of an organization, if any such exists, for a traffic in the bodies of women. You should make your investigation sufficiently broad to cover not only present conditions, but also conditions existing in the past within the statute of limitations. I charge you that it is your duty to pursue this inquiry into every channel open to you and to present to the court the facts found by you. Pursuant to your Honor's instructions, we have made an investigation into the matters referred to in your Honor's charge. We have called before our body every person whom we could find who we had reason to believe might have information on the subject. Among others were the following: a member of the National Immigration Commission assigned to investigate conditions relating to importing, seducing, and dealing in women in the City of New York, the author of an article which appeared in McClure's magazine for November, 1909, entitled The Daughters of the Poor, a former under-sheriff in the county of Essex, New Jersey, the president of the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the author of a pamphlet entitled The White Slave Traffic, a member of the New York State Immigration Commission appointed by Governor Hughes in 1908, a former police commissioner of the city of New York, detectives and other agents especially employed in connection with this investigation, members and ex-members of the New York Independent Benevolent Association, witnesses in the specific cases presented to this grand jury, as well as a number of other citizens. In addition, the foreman, the district attorney and his assistants, have interviewed representatives of the following organizations: the Committee of 14, its Research Committee, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, the Charity Organization Society, the Society for Improving the Condition of the Poor, the Committee on Amusements and Vacation Resources of Working Girls, the Society for Social and Moral Prophylaxis, the Florence Crittenden Mission, the New York Probation Association, the head workers of various social settlements, the Women's Municipal League, the Society for the Prevention of Crime, the Bureau of Municipal Research. We also published in the daily press of the city on the 6th day of May the following: the additional grand jury, sworn in January by Judge O'Sullivan of the Court of General Sessions, was charged with the investigation of the truth or falsity of certain statements which had been publicly made during the past few months to the effect that the city of New York is a center or clearinghouse for an organized traffic in women for immoral purposes, or what has come to be known as the white slave traffic. Pursuant to this charge, the grand jury has been seeking legal evidence on this subject from all available sources. The information which many citizens have volunteered to give has proved in most cases to be general rather than specific. Before closing its investigation, the grand jury desires to announce publicly that it will be glad to receive definite, specific information as to the existence in this county of any traffic in women for immoral purposes from any citizen or official or other individual who has such information. Those who are willing to assist the grand jury in its investigation are asked to call at the office of James B. Reynolds, Assistant District Attorney, Criminal Court Building, within the next week. It will save the time of many individuals and of Mr. Reynolds if only those appear who are willing and able to present facts regarding the specific matter above stated. On behalf of the additional January grand jury, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., Foreman. As a part of this investigation, evidence has been presented to us and we have found 54 indictments, 22 for rape, 16 for abduction, 10 for maintaining disorderly houses, 7 of which were Raines Law hotels, 6 for the violation of Section 2460 of the Penal Law, entitled Compulsory Prostitution of Women. We have found no evidence of the existence in the county of New York of any organization or organizations, incorporated or otherwise, engaged as such in the traffic in women for immoral purposes, nor have we found evidence of an organized traffic in women for immoral purposes. It appears, on the other hand, from indictments found by us and from the testimony of witnesses that a trafficking in the bodies of women does exist and is carried on by individuals acting for their own individual benefit, and that these persons are known to each other and are more or less informally associated. We have also found that associations and clubs, composed mainly or wholly of those profiting from vice, have existed, and that one such association still exists. These associations and clubs are analogous to commercial bodies in other fields, which, while not directly engaged in commerce, are composed of individuals, all of whom as individuals are so engaged. The incorporated syndicates and international bands referred to in published statements, we find to be such informal relations as have just been spoken of, while the international headquarters, clearing houses and pretentious clubhouses mentioned are cafes or other so-called hangouts where people interested in the various branches of the business resort. These and the houses of prostitution are also referred to as markets. The dealers and operators are the so-called pimps and procurers, the pimp being referred to as the retailer and the manager of houses as the wholesaler. The only association composed mainly or wholly of those profiting from vice, of the present existence of which we have evidence, is the New York Independent Benevolent Association, organized in the city in 1894 and incorporated in 1896. This association has had an average membership of about 100. Its alleged purpose is to assist its members in case of illness, to give aid in case of death, and to assure proper burial rites. After an exhaustive investigation into the activities of the association and of its members, we find no evidence that the association as such does now or has ever trafficked in women, but that such traffic is being or has been carried on by various members as individuals. We find that the members of this association are scattered in many cities throughout the United States. From the testimony adduced, it appears probable that the social relations of the members and the opportunity thereby afforded of communicating with one another in various cities have facilitated the conduct of their individual business. On one occasion where a member was convicted of maintaining a disorderly house and a fine of $L000 was imposed upon him in the city of Newark, New Jersey, the association voted $500 for his aid. On another occasion in the city of Newark, New Jersey, where several of the members of the association were arrested on the charge of keeping and maintaining disorderly houses, and one member was in prison, the then president went to Newark, declared to the under-sheriff that he was the president of the New York Independent Benevolent Association, and entered into negotiations with the authorities in Newark on behalf of the members who had been arrested. We have, however, no evidence of any such instance in the county of New York. It appears from the testimony of various members and ex-members of the said association that its membership is almost entirely composed of persons who are now or have been engaged in the operation of disorderly houses, or who are living or have lived directly or indirectly upon the proceeds of women's shame. None of these witnesses, in answer to specific questions, could name more than one or two present or past members whose record did not show them to have lived at some time upon the proceeds of prostitution in one form or another. They claim, however, that all members who have been convicted of a crime are expelled from the organization when the proof of that fact has been submitted, the offense apparently being not the commission of a crime, but conviction. It would appear that this procedure is for the purpose of protecting the individual if possible, and, failing in that, of freeing the association from criticism. Finding no evidence of an organized traffic in women, but of a traffic carried on by individuals, we have made a special and careful investigation along this line. Owing to the publicity given to the inquiry at its inception, it has been difficult to get legal evidence of the actual purchase and sale of women for immoral purposes, and our investigators have been informed in different quarters that a number of formerly active dealers in women had either temporarily gone out of business or had transferred their activities to other cities. However, 5 self-declared dealers in women had agreed upon various occasions to supply women to our agents, but because of their extreme caution and the fear aroused by the continued sitting of this grand jury, these promises were fulfilled in only 2 instances, in each of which 2 girls were secured for our agents at a price, in the one case of $60 each and in the other of $75 each. Indictments have been found against these 2 persons, one pleaded guilty and the other was convicted on trial. All of these parties boasted to our investigators of their extensive local and interstate operations in the recent past. They specifically mentioned the cities to which they had forwarded women and described their operations as having at that time been free from danger of detection. Our investigators also testified as to the methods and means used by these people in replenishing the supply of women and in entrapping innocent girls. Quoting again from Your Honor's charge, this traffic in women, it is charged, follows 2 main objects. First, the procuring of women of previous chaste character, who through force, duress, or deceit are finally made to live lives of prostitution. Second, the procuring of women who are already prostitutes and placing them with their consent in houses where they may ply their trade. Under the first heading, namely, the procuring of women of previous chaste character, we find the most active force to be the so-called pimp. There are in the county of New York a considerable and increasing number of these creatures who live wholly or in part upon the earnings of girls or women who practice prostitution. With promises of marriage, of fine clothing, of greater personal independence, these men often induce girls to live with them, and after a brief period, with threats of exposure or of physical violence, force them to go upon the streets as common prostitutes and to turn over the proceeds of their shame to their seducers, who live largely, if not wholly, upon the money thus earned by their victims. This system is illustrated in an indictment and conviction where the defendant by such promises induced a girl of 15 to leave her home and within 2 weeks put her on the streets as a common prostitute. We find also that these persons ill-treat and abuse the women with whom they live and beat them at times in order to force them to greater activity and longer hours of work on the streets. This is illustrated in the case of another defendant who was indicted and convicted for brutally slashing with a knife the face of his girl and leaving her disfigured for life, merely because she was no longer willing to prostitute herself for his benefit. In this connection mention should be made of the moving picture shows as furnishing to this class of persons an opportunity for leading girls into a life of shame. These shows naturally attract large numbers of children, and while the law provides that no child under the age of 16 shall be allowed to attend them unaccompanied by parent or guardian, it is a fact, as shown by the number of arrests and convictions, that the law is frequently violated. Evidence upon which indictments have been found and convictions subsequently secured, has been given, which shows that, in spite of the activities of the authorities in watching these places, many girls owe their ruin to frequenting them. An instance of the above is the case of a defendant indicted by this grand jury and convicted before your honor, where 3 girls met as many young men at a Harlem moving picture show. At the end of the performance, the young men were taken by an employee of the place through a door in the rear into a connecting building used as a fire exit for the moving picture show, where they met the girls and all passed the night together. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children has furnished statistics showing that since the 13th day of December, 1906, 33 cases of rape and seduction originated in moving picture shows, in some instances the perpetrators being the employees of the shows. It is not the purpose of this reference to bring an indictment against the moving picture show, which under proper restrictions may be an important and valuable educational and recreative factor, but rather to point out possible dangers inherent in performances carried on in the darkness and the importance of the observance of safeguards by parents or guardians, and of the strict enforcement of the law for the protection of children. Under the second heading in that portion of your honor's charge quoted above, which refers to the procuring of women who are already prostitutes and placing them with their consent in houses where they may ply their trade, the grand jury has made a special study of the class of disorderly houses commonly known as Raines Law hotels, the chief business of many of which is to provide a place where women of the streets may take their customers. The testimony given shows that girls who brought their patrons to certain hotels of this class were allowed rebates on the amount charged their patrons for rooms. Upon the evidence brought before us, indictments were found against 7 of the most notorious of these hotels. The abuse which has grown up in the conversion of the so-called massage and manicure parlor into a disorderly house, frequently of the most perverted kind, has received our careful study under this same heading. A special investigation has been made of some 125 massage and manicure parlors, in this county. Less than half of these establishments were found to be equipped for legitimate purposes, most of them being nothing but disorderly houses. The operators in such places had no knowledge of massage treatment, and in certain cases where certificates of alleged massage institutes were on the walls of the premises, they frankly admitted that they had no training in massage and did not even know the persons whose signatures appeared on the certificates. In view of the above, it would seem important that these parlors should be licensed by the health department of the city, and that all operators in them should also have a license from some approved health or medical authority, and further, that proper supervision should be exercised to ensure their operation for the legitimate purposes for which they are licensed. The spreading of prostitution in its various forms from the well-known disorderly house into apartment and tenement houses presents a very grave danger to the home. It is inevitable that children who have daily evidence of the apparent comfort, ease, and oftentimes luxury in which women of this class live should not only become hardened to the evil, but be easily drawn into the life. The existing laws for the suppression of this vice in apartment and tenement houses should be most rigorously enforced, and if necessary additional legislation enacted. But of the evils investigated under this head, the most menacing is the so-called pimp who, as already stated, while often active in seducing girls, is, to what seems to be an increasing extent, living on the earnings of the professional prostitute, constantly driven by him to greater activity and more degrading practices. We do not find that these persons are formally organized, but it would appear that the majority of the women of the street, as well as many of those who practice prostitution in houses or flats, are controlled by them and usually pay their entire earnings to them. They prescribe the hours and working places for these women, assist them in getting customers, protect them from interference when possible, and when the women are arrested, do what they can to procure their release. While their women are at work, they spend much of their time in saloons and other resorts where they gather socially. Although operating individually, their common interest leads them to cooperate for mutual protection or for the recovery of women who may desert them, and for the maintenance of their authority over their particular women. It is an unwritten law among these men that the authority of the individual over the woman or women controlled by him is unquestioned by his associates, to whatever extreme it may be carried. To obtain a conviction against one of this class is most difficult, for through fear or personal liking, his woman is loath to become a witness against him, and without her evidence conviction is almost impossible. Whatever one may think of the woman who adopts the profession of a prostitute by choice, all must agree that the man who in cold blood exploits a woman's body for his own support and profit is vile and despicable beyond expression. Only through the arousing of an intelligent and determined public sentiment which will back up the forces of law in their effort to ferret out and bring to justice the members of this debased class, is there hope of stamping out those vilest of human beings found today in the leading cities of this and other lands. In view of the foregoing, we recommend, 1. That no effort be spared in bringing to justice the so-called pimp. When the character and prevalence of these creatures are more fully realized and public sentiment aroused regarding them, the inadequate punishment now imposed should be increased and every legitimate means devised and put into execution to exterminate them. 2. That the existing laws be more rigidly enforced to safeguard the patrons of the moving picture shows, and that parents and guardians exercise more careful supervision over their children in connection with their attendance upon these shows. 3. That vigorous efforts be made to minimize the possibility of the Rainslow Hotel becoming a disorderly house, and that where necessary proper supervision and inspection looking toward that end be provided. 4. That the so-called massage and manicure parlors be put under the control of the health department, that a license from this department be required for their operation, that certificates be granted to operators only by some approved medical authority, and that proper measures be taken to enforce these laws. 5. That the laws relating to prostitution in apartment and tenement houses be rigidly enforced, and that the present laws be supplemented if necessary. 6. That a commission be appointed by the mayor to make a careful study of the laws relating to and the methods of dealing with the social evil in the leading cities of this country and of Europe, with a view to devising the most effective means of minimizing the evil in the city. John D. Rockefeller, J.R., Foreman. G.O.F. Crane, Secretary. Dated, June 9, 1910. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook. The House of Bondage updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the General Terms of Use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works, by using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg. You agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy access to a Project Gutenberg